Yeah, remember the name, Jas Takhar, best in the game. Mamba mentality in his own lane, so better pay attention to what he be saying. Get the message, ain't no question, giving advice for any investment. Welcome to the broadcast, the Jas Takhar Podcast.
I'm very excited, as I always am, but I don't say this one lightly because it's the second time this handsome, and usually I'm talking about myself, but I'm not, as you guys are going to be able to tell. And if you're driving, taking your dog for a walk, or on the treadmill, you need to get my app. It's absolutely free. Go on to the Play Store if you're an Android person. If you're an iPhoner, go into the App Store, search my name, Jas. It sounds like the music, but it's spelled differently. Jas space Takhar. Download it. There's no cost, so you can actually see my handsome and beautiful guests that I bring on to the podcast. It's none other than Mr. Darren Vorros. How you doing, brother?
Good, man. How are you?
It's part two. It's the second time we're doing
Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
Obviously, I want to have you, in all honesty, buddy, I'm not just saying this, because every time I talk to you, you're always up to something else.
Yeah.
And that's so cool to see.
I'm trying to think of what I was doing last time I was here, but it's been a journey.
Well, the last time you were here, this was pre-COVID. It was probably early 19 you were here.
Yeah.
Right? And I know that you were just getting started with kind of everything you're doing currently in terms of like coaching real estate investors.
Yeah.
Which for me, I've put out some posts like on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook and saying that there's a lot of people out there that are so-called coaches, and the old word used to be like gurus.
Yep.
That in like for both my targets, which are real estate investors and real estate professionals, there's these coaches and gurus that have never done shit.
Right.
And I can't tell you how much my team and I are so careful of not bringing people on. Sometimes we miss the boat, and sometimes, we make mistakes. We bring someone on that looks like they are actually doing what they're coaching.
Yeah.
Or what they're teaching, but they're not. And I'm saying like maybe that's happened 1 out of or 2 out of my 200 or something episodes, but you're the fucking real deal. You're the real deal because I know you for a very long time. And so as of right now and as of this recording, I vouch for this guy. I say that. You just never know.
It's the disclaimer.
That's my disclaimer. I'll really do. Because before you were getting into coaching, and we're going to talk about the journey and everything that it offers and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You actually invested yourself. Like you actually got your hands dirty. I mean, you were on HGTV, wasn't it? Like it was, you really go back and you've actually done it all. And so that's why I'm so excited to kind of have you talk to my real estate investors, the ones that have not got started, and just off air really quickly. I mean, I bumped into somebody who's an AC vac guy for where their studio is. And I was mentioning to him, he was scared. He doesn't want to do the podcast yet. Big shout out to Lawrence. Hopefully he does it. But I was mentioning to him that there's just a lot of people who are scared to get started in investing into real estate, all the horror stories, all that stuff. And then I want to take it to like where you're really at right now, and cut me off anytime, Darren, if I say something wrong, brother. But like you're helping people invest into where I really want to get to now, which is in the multiplex kind of strategies.
Yep.
But let's start here, Darren. What are you seeing? We're right now, call it May of 2023, just about the real estate landscape in terms of the market at large. Where's your headspace at?
Well, I think for me, the two recent pauses on interest rate increases or drops, I think bolstered some confidence back in the market, and I think that's been huge. I think that tells people that the sky is not falling, and I keep going back to the fact that it is simple economics. I mean, just look at supply and look at demand, and those two things do not match up. We're still in the midst of a housing crisis. We are literally not putting enough units on the market for what the demand is. So you can read all the headlines in the world around real estate, but ultimately what it's going to go back to is there's not enough supply for the demand. So if you're someone who is on the fence about being a real estate investor or getting into the real estate market, and you're concerned about values of real estate or interest rates or anything like that, You've said it a million times. I'll say it a million times. Real estate investing is a long game. So if you get in and you hold and you watch the market do what the market does, you will be fine. And I think right now you're in this position where there's some really great opportunities on the market. But I want to say one thing, and that's that I think the best deals in the real estate market right now are created. They're not found.
I love that. We're going to go into that. Just before that, I want to give people some context. How long, and I don't mean to age you by any means, how long ago did you get your first investment property?
Yeah, 21 years ago. It's hard to say that, but yeah.
Yeah, man.
I mean, I kind of backed into real estate, to be honest. Like I went to Japan. I worked over there for a year. I came back. I had some money. I didn't know what to do with that money, and I invested in real estate because.
So sorry, where that, and just out of curiosity, did that money come from your work in Japan? Yeah. So you brought that over. Continue.
Yeah, yeah. So I saved some money, and at that point I was like, I don't know anything about the stock market. I don't know anything about this. So I'm like, what I've heard is it's not a bad idea to buy real estate. So I couldn't afford Toronto. At the time I was living here, but I would have been what we call house poor if I had bought a condo in Toronto, because it would have been all my money towards that. So I went back home in Alberta where I grew up, bought a house for $130,000. Had an awful experience with my first tenant, had to evict them, learned a lesson or two. Then I had a great run for 4 years on that property. It almost doubled in value. And then I sold it and I bought 3 right after that. And so that's where I saw that exponential growth in real estate. And that's where I was like, oh, this is actually something that I could get behind in terms of a secondary income source, because it wasn't what I was doing full time then. I was a full-time actor.
Okay. So a couple of things I want to unpack there. The 21 years, very important. It almost coincides with how long I've been in the business. It's 19 years for me in the business. You've seen a couple of markets.
Yep.
Right? What have you learned within that 21 years that even now with, yes, we had the 2 pauses of interest rates, but we just came out of the most increases in a 12-month period that we've ever seen. Yep. 8 increases to be exact. We saw values at the peak in the Greater Toronto area anyways. February 2022, kind of March 2022, we saw values drop, yet and I know a lot of investors that still bought, but what have you learned from the past that someone watching right now could be like, okay, I could take that on?
Well, I think one thing that most people who have seen what's happened over the last 12 months, who've been investing for a little while, they'll never pass by another opportunity to lock in low interest money for a long period of time, right? I can't tell you how many people are on variable rate mortgages because their mortgage broker was telling them, and nothing against mortgage brokers. I have many of them and they're good friends of mine and they're excellent at what they do, but they're like, why don't you go a variable rate here? You can go from, instead of 2.1% interest over 5 years fixed, you can go to 1.8%.
They're trying to forecast
right? And it's like, okay, if anybody else that's experiencing what we're experiencing right now had the opportunity to lock in money at 2% for 5 years, they would take that all day, every day.
All day.
So I think that's the biggest lesson, right? When those opportunities come up, I think you have to be, you can't be so short-sighted to say, I'm going to save $10,000 here or $10,000 there. It's like, can I lock this in for a long period of time, cheap debt, and watch the market do what the market does? And the other thing too is, for me, it's always been about buying properties that are self-sustainable. So they have to support themselves in up markets, in down markets, in neutral markets, because if you're positive cash flow, you don't have to worry about what's happening in the market. What you have to worry about then is just when you want to sell your property, right? If your cash flow covers all your expenses and you've got a little bit left over after that, doesn't matter what the market's doing.
Is there a number that you look for, Darren, in that sense? Like, is it? It can't just be if it covers necessarily, is what I think that you're trying to say, because what if rates go up if you didn't lock in, or maybe there's some vacancy? So what are you looking at in terms of the actual potential expenses to be covered?
I think that for me, it's always, there has to be at least $200 to $300 per door of positive cash flow. But also, I think the way that people sometimes calculate cash flow is a little bit off, and I think that's why when we're teaching this, it's like, how many people that are like mortgage, property tax, utilities, insurance, anything above that, it's positive cash flow. I'm like, you're missing a few things, right?
A couple of big ones.
You're missing vacancy, right? You're missing repairs and maintenance.
What do you put in for repairs and maintenance?
Minimum 5%.
Okay, so
I would say
I'm
on a
right
standard
there.
property.
Okay.
On a brand new like condo, sure, I'll give you 3% if you want.
Okay.
But 5% is kind of where I run. And same with vacancy, right? 5% is a good starting point.
And do you use 5% even in GTA as well?
Yep.
Okay. Just
Why
be
not?
ultra conservative.
Right? Because here's the reality. That number, that 5%, that means you can have 1 month vacant in a 20-month span, basically. So if you have 1 month of vacancy over every 2 years, that's 5%. So the reality of that is pretty strong, that you're going to have 1 month sit vacant.
Oh, for sure. Just even if you're just
period.
turning over
Exactly.
a tenant, right?
Yeah.
Like you're going to go in, you're going to paint, you're going to clean and all that.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to quickly go back to with your first investment property, where it's always funny. I always speak about someone's horror story that they told another person. And generally it was in their first one, their property, and 98% of the time, it has to do with the tenant.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's usually the tenant didn't pay or they ruined my place.
Yeah.
That story that someone's uncle told them back in 1978 now deters anybody or someone or most people from investing into real estate. It didn't for you. Why?
I think that it was a tough lesson to learn for sure. So my situation was not paying rent, right? Put somebody in. They were a professional tenant.
Got it.
They knew exactly. They were actually looking for me as much as I was looking for them, right? They were like looking for an inexperienced landlord.
Yeah.
Because that didn't know, the rules and regulations. I was a quick study, right? And I figured out very quickly how this person, I needed to get them out of my property. And luckily we did that in a way that they didn't damage anything, or we lost a month or two of rent.
Okay.
It's not the end of the world, right? But the bounce back after that, and I think this is just my personality in general. It's like, okay, I can either exit and say, forget real estate. It was an awful experience. Or I can learn from that mistake and apply it to the next situation and apply it to the next situation after that. And that was what I did. And I've honestly, since that day, I've never had to evict another single tenant.
So what are you doing up front? I take it like there's something that you're doing, like you have a checklist that you go through before you let the tenant in.
It's all of those things, but I think ultimately what you have to rely on in a lot of ways is your gut instincts on people, right? I think I'm a pretty good judge of character. I've been burned a couple times here and there, but I think ultimately if you're, you can do all the checks and balances, and you still need to check references, and you need to do all those different kinds of things. But ultimately for me, it's been relying on my gut. Now, I don't manage a lot of my properties anymore. I pass that off to my team of people that do it, but I teach them the systems that I use. And a lot of that it comes down to, just checking all of those facts and figures and making sure that they're all there. And then ultimately, what's your worst case scenario? Your worst case scenario, and for me, this is a situation where I generally have a higher quality of tenant because most of my properties are well renovated, they're well taken care of, and so in general, those people are not the kinds of people that tend to damage properties and things like that. So you have to look at the demographic that you want to go after, and that'll kind of depict how you're investing.
And obviously you're basing that a lot on the location first, I would think, right? Just maybe a higher net worth kind of population and we're, okay. Yeah. And because I want to get into kind of some of your determining factors, how you pick properties and areas and all that kind of stuff. What I've always advised clients, and even when I rent out like my condos or properties, I generally go a little bit below what market value for that area is in terms of rent, so I can cherry pick
the best.
Is that something that you're still advising, like so you have more, like a bigger pool of possible tenants?
I don't do that.
Okay.
I think what I generally will do is I will wait. I will not place a tenant to get a month's rent that could be a potential headache down the road. I'll give it another month. I always teach my students, I'm like, just wait for the right tenant. Don't put somebody in because you're worried about losing revenue for that month. If you're at the top of the market in terms of your market rent, you might have to wait a month or two to find a quality tenant that's going to fill that spot, as opposed to saying, I'll take the first applicant because I need to put somebody in here. Well, that's going to be a huge problem down the road. And you're going to lose every single dollar that you wanted to save by putting that person in there very quickly.
Now, when you were talking about having a team is that like an internal team that's doing your property management, or have you outsourced that out?
So I have both.
Okay.
I have an internal team here in the GTA, and I have an external team in anything other than the GTA. So Alberta, Hamilton, Newmarket, Costa Rica, all of those other different locations.
When did you get to a place when you said to yourself, okay, I'm not going to manage these properties? Because you know how to do all this. Like, you teach it, and you've been doing it yourself for a long time. Because I have a lot of clients who are now getting into their 14th, 15th door. Some of them have outsourced it to outside property managers, and some are still doing it themselves. Is there like kind of a rule of thumb that you work off, or when did you do it for yourself?
For me, it was a gradual thing where I just wanted to start passing off certain properties at different times, and I was managing a lot of stuff in the beginning. I'm a big fan of the hybrid model, which is instead of hiring property managers, I hire people that are looking for work, and I teach them how to be a property manager. So my property manager in Red Deer, that I have 5 properties, 10 doors there, they're not a licensed property manager per se. You don't need a license in Alberta anyway.
Okay.
But it's somebody who's been in the real estate industry for a while, and I taught her exactly how I wanted her to manage the properties.
But that's still going to be tough for somebody else to find that, though. No, how do you go about finding someone like that?
I mean, there's so many people looking for just extra work. I mean, this is not a full-time job.
Right.
This is like Jill, in my case. She was a stay-at-home mom. She had 2 kids. She was raising them, and she wanted like this part-time flexibility. But at the same time, she treats my tenants amazing. She's really good at what she does. And she perfected my system because I taught it to her right from the ground up. So she's been an amazing find for me. Now, I didn't turn it on right away and be like, you're going to manage everything, right? At first, I gave her, all you need to do is show up, meet the tenants, show the property, let me know your initial thoughts.
Okay.
I did the leasing. I collected all the payments. I did all that kind of stuff. As she gets more comfortable, I'm like, okay, now you're going to start to fill out the leases. Now you're going to do this. Now you're going to do that, right? And I start to pass off responsibilities. And eventually now I'm like, she calls me once every 6 months and is like, hey, what's up? Here's the updates on the properties. I'm like, great, fantastic.
That's another expense that people don't forecast and or put in their performas as well, right? So that's something that
even if they are managing themselves, they need to include property management.
And so would you do it at 8 to 10%?
Yep.
Okay. And why do you say that? Because that's just the time?
Because the reality is at some point they're not going to want to manage those properties.
Yeah, so let's start
And all of a
now.
sudden today it's like your numbers are great because you're managing the property.
Yeah.
It's also, how do you compare one investment to another? If you want to go and buy a property in another market that you have to pay property management on, how can you tell which investment is a good opportunity? When one of them, you're not including half the expenses and the other one you are. You can't compare apples to apples at that point. So for me, I'm always like, even if you are managing your properties yourself, you have to include that as a line item.
Well, because you just took me somewhere else now. Is there anything else that somebody might be missing in terms of when they're working their pro forma?
I mean, there's all the little things, right? Like for me, it's tenant gifts, once a year, whatever, birthdays, when they move in, that's a small line item. Accounting, right? Accounting, bookkeeping, if they're having an accountant or a bookkeeper look after things. Snow removal, is a big thing in 100%. Canada.
Yes.
So if you've got more than a single unit, a duplex, a triplex, something like that, the reality is you probably should have somebody taking care of the snow removal because it's a liability for you. Somebody slips and falls on your property. There's all those little things, but the big 4 are property management, repairs and maintenance, vacancy, and what's the other one I'm missing right now?
You got vacancy.
And then all the other like ancillary things like tenant gifts.
Exactly.
And all those, yeah.
I know you're at a place where it's not the snow removal cost that took you to Costa Rica, but I gotta ask, why Costa Rica and what are you seeing there? We're in 2023. I've been hearing about Costa Rica for the past couple of years. Personally, I got to be honest with you, I'm always a little timid when it comes to getting outside of like North America. I mean, there's
outside of Yonge and Lawrence.
Yeah, that's so true. Like I love downtown proper. You know me. You know the videos I put out. But I want to talk about all things kind of Costa Rica. What are you seeing there, man? And how does somebody get involved? All that kind of stuff.
I started going to Costa Rica about 10 years ago, and I went there as most people do, vacation, of course. And I just fell in love with this little town called Nosara. It's on the Pacific coast. It's a surf town. It's a yoga town, and it's got this great little vibe. And I just kept going back year after year after year. And last year was my first year where I basically left middle of December, and I said I'm gone until April 1st. Basically, I'm going to try to skip the entire winter.
Okay.
And last year I did a month in Mexico, and then I did 2 months in Costa Rica. This year I did the same timeline. I left mid-December, came back April 1, and I did the entire time in Nosara in that one little spot. And last year at the end of the year, I bought land. Now being a developer, I was like, there's the vacancy rate there is, you can't find a place to rent. It's almost impossible.
Is that like through Airbnb and stuff?
Airbnb, anything, even the hotels are always booked up during those times.
So you bought vacant land?
Yeah.
Okay.
2 lots together. And then, that's kind of been my place that I'm looking to invest in a foreign market. But, I can see why people are intimidated by investing in a foreign country. There are some nuances that you have to understand and some things that are just a little different than investing back home.
And so in terms of like security and all that, like specifically Costa Rica checks off on kind of all the boxes. I've never been there. That's why I'm asking.
It probably checks the boxes more so than some other popular destinations.
Okay.
Like for me, the comparison was always Mexico, right? Mexico, probably a lot more corruption, as you might imagine.
100%.
A lot more violence. Costa Rica doesn't have an army. They're just one of those countries that's kind of like Switzerland. They're quite neutral when it comes to
nobody
everything.
really wants to touch them.
No, it's just like, that the culture there is not, they don't have a lot of violent crime. There's a little bit of petty crime here and there, but ultimately it's a really safe place to visit. And then of course the climate, it's about as close to the equator as you can get, and it's pretty consistent. I mean, when I'm there from December until April, it's 33 and sunny 98%.
Well, when I do Zoom meetings with him while he's there, he's my complexion. A, B, you're always in a tank top.
Yeah, it's so hot there.
It's so hot there. Landlord friendly, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a very friendly place to develop. I mean, they don't really have, like in Nosara, for instance, they don't have a zoning bylaw like what we have here. Okay. It's like, if your piece of land, obviously you can't do like an industrial project in the middle of a residential kind of commercial area, but they have kind of 2 rules, like 50% lot coverage and no more than 3 stories. But if you want to do commercial, you can do commercial. If you want to do residential, you can do residential. And it's kind of like...
So the whole mixed use, it's easy.
Whatever you want to do.
There's nothing to really deal with there.
No.
Coming back to Toronto now, I put out a video, I think about 3-4 days ago, and I got blasted on it, both on Instagram and TikTok. And I actually didn't even think I said much on it other than the fact that I think Toronto's a world-class city.
Yeah.
That's all I said. And it went off. Your thoughts about it?
I did a similar video recently too. And I got some hate comments as well. I don't know. People hating on Toronto for sure. And I'm not from here. So I know. For me, it's easy to
But you call this place home now.
Oh, absolutely. Right, I've been here longer than I was, living in Alberta.
Okay.
But people love to hate Toronto.
I don't get it.
But again, you can debate on, the traffic and some of the situations that living in Toronto poses. But from an investment perspective, you cannot debate the numbers. And very simply, like I said, there is an imbalance of supply and demand. So for me, if you're looking at, and if you said, I've got $100,000, which market do you want to invest in? I'll give you 2 that will probably beat every other market they have beat them for the last 20 years and will continue to beat them for the next 20, and that's Vancouver and Toronto.
Yeah.
Because most people in Canada, they want to live in one of these 2 major markets.
So now what do you say to people about, you're not going to see the cash flow here?
Then I say you're buying the wrong kinds of properties. Yep. Right. So for me, I get that argument for sure. Which is why, for me, the smallest property that I have here now, I sold my condo a couple of years ago, but it was a great investment for appreciation, not for cash flow, after a certain amount of time. But for me, my smallest units now are triplexes and fourplexes, right? So they have enough revenue based on those 3 or 4 units that they actually do cash flow.
So when did you start now to move to the whole multiplex? Because I really want to speak about that, because a lot of my investors are at that stage now where they want to level up.
Yep.
And so I have a feeling that's what you wanted to do. Hence,
for sure. Yeah. I think that I bought my first triplex and converted it legally in 2007. And that was the first time I saw, multiple units in Toronto, and I got the best of both worlds. I got the cash flow, I got the mortgage pay down, and I got this massive appreciation, like the craziest appreciation you'll ever kind of see in a market. And when I looked at that, and then I did a purpose-built triplex years later, and we've added since a laneway suite, so we have 4 units on that one property. And then I was like, well, if 4 works, then 6 or 8's got to be even better, right? So how do we figure that out? And that was a simple zoning exercise, right? If you look at the zoning bylaw in Toronto, and this is where I think a lot of people fall down, is they don't really know to look to these kinds of things to figure out what's going on. Look at the zoning bylaw in Toronto. 90% of the properties in Toronto proper have what's called R zoning. And R zoning allows you to do anything from a single family dwelling all the way up to an apartment building. That zoning right there is not common. Go to any other municipality across the country, and that zoning does not exist. It'll be like you can do a single family dwelling or maybe a duplex, but not all the way up to an apartment building. So then I was like, well, then what we need is basically a larger lot so that we can get more density on the property. So where are those larger lots? They're in older established neighborhoods. And where are those older established neighborhoods? They're right next to transit. Right? So all of a sudden you start looking at all this stuff and you're like, wow, all of these things are actually a benefit to going to that bigger property on the bigger, lot. Now what's the challenge? The purchase price is higher. So now you go into the $2 million range or the $2.5 million or the $3 million range. But the nice thing about that is your competition is cut in half, right? You're now not dealing with first-time home buyers. Right, so you eliminate most of the people that are looking to qualify for that $1 million property in Toronto.
And even not even first-time investors either.
Exactly.
They're not really playing in the 2 to 3 million. Continue.
Exactly, right? So that's, when I started to look at all of that, I was like, there's something here. And then now recently with the Bill 23 changes, I mean, this is such a game changer for development in the city of Toronto. Anything under, and this is why we used to stick to the 4s, 3 or 4 units, because we didn't have to go through site plan approval. Site plan approval is it's a process that takes 12 to 18 months. It costs a lot of money. It takes time. It's the city has a say in what your building looks like and all these kinds of things. It was a terrible process. Well, what they did is they changed the rules now. So now in Toronto, anything under 10 units does not have to go to site plan approval. So as long as it meets the zoning bylaw, you go straight to building permit.
And which Toronto, I think it's not the city of Toronto, it's Canada as a whole. I think it's like number 64 in terms of in the world of how long it used to take to get like past all the bylaws and the zoning and to get permits essentially, which is ridiculous for a world-class country.
That's why we have an imbalance as well.
100%.
Supply and demand.
Exactly, right? Where in the Greater Toronto Area specifically, though, are you kind of looking at now?
I'm a West End guy, so
Okay,
I like High Park. I like we have a project at Dufferin and Bloor. We've got a project at Dovercourt and Bloor. So I'm concentrated in the West End, but that's basically where I find a lot.
Are you in a sweet spot, like 8 to 9, 10 doors up to 20? Like, what do you?
Yeah, so basically we're doing a lot of either buying an existing property, a single family dwelling, something like that, like I say, that's got a large footprint, and we're either adding to that building significantly, adding off the back and going 3 stories, or we're tearing it down and rebuilding as a purpose-built 8 or 10 unit building.
Now, I personally probably wouldn't suggest somebody who's, even if you have your own principal residence, like call it an investment, call it not an investment, whatever it is. But once you're getting into like actually investing into real estate, I personally wouldn't recommend like doing what Darren's doing on your own. Like it just, you would agree. Like it just doesn't make sense. You could tell the guy knows what he's freaking talking about. A lot of stuff. Yeah. Where would you take like that person who's in their first or second door that they're looking at, their third maybe even investment property? What would you kind of suggest to go? Like, would it be a triplex?
Yeah,
maybe a fourplex?
I think like there's a great opportunity, and that's why I kind of started off our session today saying the best opportunities are created, they're not found. So most people will go and look at a property and say, well, I want to change the flooring and the carpets or whatever, and I want to do all this kind of stuff, this cosmetic stuff. Yeah. I'm like, how can you add density to this property, right? Okay, so you got a typical Toronto, like call it semi-detached or detached homes. What are most of them? Most of them are 2.5 story, right? So, or 2 story even at a minimum. So for me, that's a triplex right there.
Right.
Basement 1 unit, main floor 1 unit, second floor, 1 unit. If you got a half story, maybe you top it up, you go 3 stories, and now you got a 4-plex, right? Or can you find something that now we can have garden suites in Toronto, and we can also have laneway suites, right? So now we're adding a unit in the back of the property as well. So anything now under 4 units in Toronto doesn't require parking, which is a recent change as well. Yep. It's exempt from development charges, which is another recent change, which is huge. So for me, that's where there's opportunity, is like go in, find a single family dwelling, or find something that's, illegally chopped up into a duplex or triplex, make it legal, add that 4th unit. And now you've got a property that, hey, if you even want to live in one of the units, I'm a huge fan of house hacking. That's how I got started in Toronto. I was like, live in one of the units, rent out the other 3. The other 3 are going to pay for all your expenses and your mortgage. You live there for free, and you've got a property that's appreciating in value, and you just keep repeating that.
Is there an actual difference between like laneway housing and garden suites?
Yeah.
So what is that exactly? What's the exact definition?
So garden is basically something that has a backyard with no access from, to a laneway or to another.
Okay.
So it's pretty straightforward. If it backs onto a laneway, it's
a laneway house. Okay.
Anything else is considered like in a backyard would be a garden suite.
So in terms of construction, though, is there a massive difference in costs, or is it pretty much the same?
No, I mean, the biggest challenge with garden suites and laneway suites is connecting services, right? So you have to connect them through the house. The idea with these ancillary units is they don't want a bunch of new dwellings being attached to the water and sewer of the city of Toronto, right?
Okay.
They want them to run through the house. That way you also can't sever the land.
Got it.
Because that's what they're trying to avoid too. Now you sever the land, and all of a sudden you've got a laneway suite or a garden suite that goes from $500,000 to $1 million
for sure,
because it has separate title.
Yeah, and right? I was just about to say, as a different municipal address.
Yeah, exactly. We're trying to basically add density onto the same systems
and make it affordable.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, is there certain areas in Toronto that really lend itself for one of the two?
I mean, I think that there's lots of properties in Toronto that have actually, I think the laneway network in Toronto is like one of the most significant in North America in terms of our laneway access to each one of the properties.
That makes sense.
So there's lots of laneway possibilities. But now this garden suite thing has really changed the name of the game too as well. And there's just so many different strategies in terms of building them, right? Like we used to have to do what's called slab on grade. We used to have to dig up the earth, and we used to have to like pour concrete, and then we would build off of that. Well, now they've got these things called helical piles, basically giant screws that go into the ground. You don't have to excavate. You just bring this little machine in, it drills down these screws. You can do your foundations on that, and away you go. So it also helps. You don't have to take out trees. You don't have to damage trees. There's all these different kinds of construction techniques that really allow us to add these suites almost to any property.
Yours is what, about 800 square feet, 700, the one that you...
720.
I remember, okay.
Yeah. And we're doing them on all of our properties now. We're about to add 3 laneway and garden suites to even our 8-plexes. We're adding an additional unit in the back. So we're making them 9.
9.
Yeah.
And it's always in and around that 700 square feet?
No, some of them we can go 2-story, and we can go 1,300 square feet.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Talk to me about, call it just price per kind of square foot. And then I could kind of do my math, and my clients the listeners can do their own math on it.
Yeah.
What are you looking at to build something
You're
like
looking
that?
at probably, I will say, a finished package, like architectural drawings, construction management, turnkey. You're looking at $350 a foot.
$350 a foot. Yeah. Okay.
So
that's not bad at all, actually.
Call it $400,000 for that 1,300 square foot unit. That is like turnkey number.
Yep.
And that thing will generate, it'll generate $3,600 a month.
All day long.
Yeah.
All day
you're
long.
almost hitting the 1% rule.
Right, which is like, I mean, that, I don't know when that rule came into play, but it's been very tough to hit that. Yeah. I mean, I don't really talk about it much, but where you can actually get close to it in this situation, I mean, it's a win-win situation in that sense, right? Let's shift it a little bit, Darren, because there's people here, as we mentioned, shouldn't be doing this on their own. How can they get involved, though, with other people who are doing it? and not necessarily in particular with you, because we'll obviously touch on that.
Yeah.
But what are some ways that, okay, somebody has now like 5, 6, 7 doors. They're ready to say, okay, I can't do this on my own. I got to do this through like a joint venture.
Yep.
What are some of the things that they should be looking for and maybe staying away from?
Well, I think anytime you're going to partner, and I'm a little bit, not that I'm anti-partnership, but I think that people use partnerships sometimes in a way that they're using it as a bit of a crutch. I see a lot of like real estate investors come together, for instance, and partner, and they're going to say, hey, let's do this project together. What I'd rather see is somebody who doesn't have any real estate investing experience partner with someone who does. That partnership makes sense. But for two real estate investors to partner together, I think sometimes it's just like, well, if there's two of us, it'll be, less risk. And I'm like, no, now you just got too many cooks in the kitchen.
100%.
You got too many people trying to make decisions.
Yeah.
But I like the partnerships that are, hey, you're someone who has a 9-to-5 job or whatever, and you love your job. You love the things that you do. You have no interest in going and figuring out the municipal planning department.
Or the screws that you were talking
and
about.
And all of those. Yeah, exactly.
Right?
I don't care. Just here's some money that I want to invest in the real estate market and find somebody who is excellent at what they do and just partner with them. That makes sense to me all day. But the whole real estate investing partnership
that makes sense, man. Like I got a couple of
business.
business partners in a couple of my organizations, and both of them are the organizations. I love them both to death. Yeah. But we're in both situations, we're kind of type A personalities, and so sometimes 100%. It makes it very, very difficult. Shout out to Simo, shout out to Alto, where sometimes we're going at it, right? And so it's very similar in that sense. And we help a lot of investors invest into the condos, the duplexes, and all that. Yeah. And what I'm always mentioning to them is like, look, your goals need to be aligned. Yeah. Not that I'm the only one that suggests this, or it's the only way to do it. I'm like, if you're not thinking about this as like through a 10-year window, you probably shouldn't get into bed together, because one of you are gonna want to sell, the other one's not. It just makes it difficult. Is that kind of what you've seen as well?
100%. And I think the thing that most people forget, and this is something that I fell into as well, I went into some partnerships and what I was looking for was support. I was looking for additional hands on deck to help me. Well, you know what I could have done? I could have hired someone. I could have hired someone for $100,000 a year that was very qualified to help me out. But guess what? If I don't want to I'm not in partnership with that person. They're there to help me do what I need to do. At $100,000 a year, I'm like, great. If I don't want to work with that person anymore, we're done. It's not a conversation.
Exactly.
It's very quick and it's very easy, right?
For sure.
I think that people are afraid because they don't know how to hire, so they go to partner, right?
Yes.
And so, like you say, if you don't see that. And most people will, like be in a new relationship. We're like, oh, I see this lasting for 10 years. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it's like,
you know what? It's so funny that you're saying this, because it's the infatuation.
100%.
Right? Like, this is going to last forever, but the novelty wears off pretty quickly.
Things change quickly, right?
100%.
And that's, that relationship is almost harder to get out of than an actual marriage.
It is, because not everyone, like with actual marriage, I mean, there's 51%, 50% chance. There's divorce attorneys. There's all that thing. Yeah. It's very common per se. Yeah. Where there's not.
Now you're in a business. Now that's not so easy to get out of it.
I see that now. How do people actually get involved with everything that you're up to? I want to really dive into that with you, brother. So what is what you're up to in terms of your coaching, all that, man?
Well, for me now, it's all around development, and just taking investors. So the people that are interested in, that are, I would say have the 5 or 6 door experience, the people that want to get to that next place and do the kinds of projects that I'm doing, I'm now just exclusively teaching development, right? And I think that's where my students now are just really focused on. How do we help solve this housing crisis? How do we add more units? And for me, it's all around that missing middle. Okay. The missing middle is just it's not the towers. I'm not teaching people how to develop a 250 unit tower. that's the next level, you know, and we can do that. But ultimately, I love these 8s and 10s and 12s and 14s because every municipality needs them. They can go into residential neighborhoods. They don't stick out like a sore thumb. You're not trying to build a 20-story tower surrounded by a bunch of single-family dwellings.
So you don't get a lot of pushback.
Exactly.
And,
So for me, that missing middle, those 8s and 10 and 12 unit buildings is what I teach on a development side. In terms of investing, you know, people want to work with me on investing. Like we have 4 projects in Toronto. You know, we bring in external investors for all of those projects. They basically get to own a piece of Toronto real estate without having to do any of the work. And they, you know, basically get a portion of cash flow every single quarter. They get cash flow distributions and they own that piece of real estate, you know, alongside me, and I develop it, and they just get to hang along for the ride.
Well, I mean, it's one of the best ways to be kind of like a silent partner. And when you said own a piece of real estate in Toronto, I am going to say that it is a world-class city. And with 500,000 people coming into our country every single year almost now, knowing that 50% of them come here to the GTA, Southern Ontario, whatever you want to call it, I mean, we have a massive crisis. When you're talking about the teaching, though, I want to go back to that for a sec, Darren. Are you talking like, do you teach like construction, all of that? Is that like...
Yeah, I'll teach basically people how to take a development project from conception all the way to completion.
Okay.
So that is like, you know, how do we first find these opportunities? How do we get them through the, you know, the approval process if they need one? How do we get financing for them? And there's a whole bunch of new financing rules that have changed recently in favor of development, in favor of building for the purpose of renting. CMHC has a new program that will give you 95% of loan to cost and amortize over 50 years. I mean, all these things, it's all there. Everyone's trying to encourage more developers to build to rent because why? We're in a housing crisis and they know it. And that's why I teach it, right? So I'm teaching people really how to develop the way that I do.
Are you, so outside of like Costa Rica and the GTA, is there anything else kind of on the radar for you that you're like, okay, I know Vancouver, I just don't really know any of the bylaws and the zoning in terms of Vancouver, but like, you know, Red Deer, I mean, other than Simos and yourself, like I don't really like that's where he's originally from. Yeah. I don't really know much about that either. But is there other places like anywhere east?
I mean, I think that the nice thing about some of the financing programs that we have in Canada is that they are, you know, they're national, so we can get financing on any of our projects with this new program with CMHC. And the nice thing about it is there is an affordability element that they've brought into play. So I'll give you a quick example, right? So if you're building a brand new apartment building, let's call it a 10-unit building, CMHC has a new rule that says if you dedicate 10% of the units in your building to affordable housing for the next 10 years, then you get basically to get amortize your loan over a longer period of time, you get to bring up the loan to value. So how many units is 10% in a 10-unit building? One unit, yeah. Right? So if I'm in Toronto, the affordability mandate basically says it's based on the average income. So the average income in Toronto is actually lower than what it is in Calgary.
Interesting.
Hard to believe, right?
Yeah.
Like you think about the amount of people, the amount of money that, you know, people make in Toronto in general, like, you know. So in Toronto, an affordable housing unit, the maximum that we can charge is $1,348 a month.
Okay.
That is far below market rent.
Even for like a studio of 400 square feet.
And that's
really quickly, Nikki, can you find out what the average income is in Toronto, whatever the latest number comes? I'm very curious.
It's close to 60 grand.
Oh, so you know. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
So you go to Alberta, and then tell me what Alberta is if you don't know.
75.
Holy shit. So you know, okay, good. Right? We're going to fact check our boy Darren right now.
So you can check those numbers for sure. But, so what happens is now you've got your higher income base in Calgary. So your affordable unit in Calgary, your rent now becomes $1,500 a month. Well, $1,500 a month in Calgary is market rent for a studio or one-bedroom unit. So although it's deemed affordable by CMHC,
right,
it's actually market rent in a market like Calgary, whereas here in Toronto, you're taking a significant haircut at $1,348 on even on a bachelor suite, something like that.
Now, at a higher scale, from an investment perspective between Calgary and say Toronto. Like we know what Toronto offers, right? What I've always been scared about when it comes to Calgary, because I have a lot of people, especially like in my culture, like the Indians are rushing over there right now to invest. But what I think they're doing wrong is that, and this is not like from a biased opinion because I have access to that stuff there as well, I just don't promote it, I don't talk about it, is the condos, when you look at that market when it comes to Calgary, like the appreciation is very, very low over time. It's almost nothing, and negative sometimes. Simos and I talk about his condo in Red Deer. Like he doesn't even sell it. He's losing money on it, but he's like, if I sell this, I'm going to be losing so much money. I'm just better to just keep renting it and getting the principal pay down on it. But when it comes to condos, in Calgary specifically, not necessarily Edmonton maybe, but with Calgary, like that's not what people want to live in there. No. You know, we're here in Toronto, we're used to the 550 square feet kind of what some might call shoeboxes, but this is normal living for us here. Do you kind of agree with that, Darren?
I 100% agree with that. So here's the model that I love in like Alberta, for instance. I love the 8 townhomes, right? You find a piece of property that you can build 8 townhomes on, because everybody wants their own 4 walls or their own 3 walls or sometimes 2 walls in this case, right? But they think of that townhouse differently than they think about living in a condo. And you can build an 8-unit building. It's still a rental property. Right. It's still 8 units. Yes. You can get CMHC financing. Anything over 6, you can get this fantastic financing on. You go in, you purpose build it. You don't have any maintenance for the first 10 years. You got a brand new building. You've got excellent quality tenants, and you've got cash flow. And to your point, you just got to ride out the market for appreciation, because it could take 5 years, could take 10 years. You could see very little appreciation, but you've got to buy for cash flow in a market like Edmonton, Calgary, or Red Deer for sure.
I had Patrick Francie, CEO of Rain, on here maybe a couple of months ago or something, and he's from there. And sorry, he's not from there. He's from Vancouver, but he spends a lot of time in Calgary. And we were just talking about that it's not as cyclical as it used to be, based on kind of the oil industry and all that. Like there's a lot of tech jobs that are moving there, which obviously I'm personally looking at job growth, because like who's going to be paying for the place, right? Now, you also mentioned the townhomes. Is that similar to what I'm used to here in Toronto? Like, are they the 3-story kind of stacked townhomes? Okay, and then they have like this common element park, like a little park in the common area, kind of in the middle. So it's very similar to what's here.
For sure. I mean, I think the difference there is, and maybe some of them have here as well. Like every unit would have a garage, because that's big in Alberta,
and maybe a backyard. A little bit. Okay, so very similar to this. And do they have condo fees attached to it because of the common element area?
Well, you could do that. Okay. I mean, I wouldn't separately, like you could separately title them. But in the case of, if you want to get some great long-term financing on them, I would just, like, you have everything separately metered, but you have it under one title, so that you actually own those 8 units and you just are renting them out. And that's when you can get CMHC to come in and finance that project on the construction side, and also on the long-term buy and hold side.
You said it was a 50-year amortization?
50-year amortization.
Wow. Okay.
And we just secured financing on one of our, it's called MLI Select. That's the CMHC program. 3.93. Right. So the interest rates are different as well.
And what's the term on that though?
That's on a 10-year, but we got
That's amazing.
We got 3.53 6 months ago on a 5-year.
Wow.
So fixed rate, and you've, like I say, it's CMHC insured. So lenders are lining up to do those loans. And you've got this, low interest, long-term financing on a property that you basically don't have a lot of maintenance on for the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. So, I mean, for everybody who's watching and listening right now, because we're going to shift the conversation a little bit to content. Because it's one of my favorite topics and I just love it. And last time I checked, my name's on the podcast, so I can talk about whatever I want. But more importantly, the segue is very important for everybody who's watching and listening, because if you want to get to learn more about not what necessarily Darren does, even with the coaching company and everything, but the team's going to put all the links and everything there. But if you just want to get a lot of knowledge and extract the 21 years of experience, it's probably best to go on your YouTube page, I would say, right? Okay. So not everyone has the star capability that you kind of came into content creation with. But what has it done for you? Like, because this is a new type of content. Like, you were on TV before, right? And that's like before the 21 years? Like, how long ago was that, man?
Well, I started, I started, I was in theater. That was my background, right? So that's where I got comfortable being on stage. The TV stuff was much later. It was actually after I stopped doing theater that I got a couple of those TV opportunities. Which were more based around the renovation stuff, which was kind of odd because I was so used to being up on stage singing and dancing for a living, right? So yeah, that whole TV thing was a little bit of.
Can we find any clips of you singing and dancing?
Sure. Yeah. If you don't have any, I'll send you some.
Okay, send some over to us. Yes, we're gonna throw that in there. He's been singing and dancing. I can't wait to see that.
Oh yeah, like I was in the big Toronto musicals. I mean, I did them all here for a while.
I remember you mentioning this in the first first pod we did.
We Will Rock You. I did all these.
That's so cool. Yeah, that's so cool. So. You know,
but the jump from there to content creation, I heard you say it, I think, on one of your pieces of content that I saw the other day. It's like, I am still not all that comfortable in front of the camera. I don't think anyone truly is unless they're a narcissist. But
100%.
You know, like I think,
Leo even said that. DiCaprio, he's been like, he still goes through that. But continue,
of course. Like I think we do it. We turn the camera on, and then the results of that end up being good, or we're satisfied enough. But it's not like I sit at home, watch my YouTube videos, and go, "Oh man, did I ever look good there or sound good there?" I'm still judging myself with everything that I do.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you just have to get over that and just get it out there, because the amount of people that I get response from that YouTube channel, and the amount of, for lack of a better word, notoriety that it's brought me in the real estate investing industry has been a game changer.
So what has that been like? What is the actual results for you that you've seen? And I asked that question not only for the real estate investors, because I actually have like a thought process around why investors themselves need to create content. And so we can touch on that, because I want to get your thoughts on that. But it's for the other 50% of my viewers and listeners that are real estate professionals, where like I have no vested interest in them doing it, Darren. Like, in fact, it's actually good that they don't produce a lot of content, because I'm, picking up on that market share. Yeah. But that's not fun for me. Like, I want people I like the email or the DM that says, "Oh my God, Jas, because of you've been screaming, doing content. Like, I'm starting to pick up on business and all that kind of stuff." What has that result been for you? Like, that notoriety, what have you gotten out of it?
Well, and this was part of the reason why I was looking to start a YouTube channel, because that's the first question, is like, what are you trying to achieve from this, right? Because if you're looking to make $1 million in ad revenue, that's a long journey.
That's Mr. Beast world.
Yeah, right? So that's a whole other thing. I think that's why a lot of younger people get into content creation, because they're like, I'm going to do this full time, until they realize it's a grind. It's hard. You have to be consistent. You have to be like almost like a professional athlete, where less than 1% of those people are actually going to make it to the point where they're making such huge money.
I love that you said that, brother, because I've never really even used that analogy. So continue. Like, I just love the fact that you mentioned that there's only going to be like a 1% that's going to actually get to that level.
Of course. For everyone else, you have got to figure out why you're doing it. So for me, it was 3 or 4 fold, right? Okay. The first one was, I really wanted to be able to bring potential investors to me, instead of me reaching out to people and saying, "Would you like to invest in my project?" By educating and by doing all that kind of stuff, I'm going to get investors reaching out to me and saying, "Hey, I see what you're doing. I'd love to be a part of one of your projects." That was number one. Number two, I wanted to be able to help other people, right? So I've had a lot of people help me throughout my journey, giving me advice, telling me the things that I wanted to know and needed to know. I might have got that advice late. I wish I'd gotten it earlier. But for me, that was the second thing. And then because of that, now I can potentially start to create courses and education and things like that I can actually monetize what I'm teaching, right? And then, of course, from that, there's also some of the other elements, which, there's like a little bit of like YouTube ad revenue here and there and stuff like that. But it was really around those two major things. It's like, can I bring people to me and they start to know who I am? I can walk into pretty much any real estate investing event, especially in Ontario or even in Canada, and I'll have at least a couple people come up and be like, "Hey, I love your videos. I've been watching them." I've been stopped 4 times in Costa Rica on the beach You're like, hey, I know you, Darren Vorros. I watch your YouTube channel.
That's
and I'm
crazy.
like, that is wild, right?
Yeah.
So it's just that kind of stuff, and it's that really has been a game changer for me.
And so for everybody who's watching and listening, think about that for a second. My man's in Costa Rica, just walking on the beach. He has a little bit of leverage with that person. And I don't mean that from a negative perspective. Like that person's like, oh my God, like I watch your stuff. And now they want to hear more from you, right? And so that's why, I've been pushing my real estate professionals to get on it as quickly as possible, because platforms change and because I don't, you're starting to do more stuff on like the TikToks and stuff like that as well now, right? Like
for sure. My bread and butter, I think, is my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
But, as you know, content is becoming shorter and shorter. People are consuming it in, 30,
Did you find
60
that harder?
seconds. I actually love it. I love the short form content. Because the amount of energy and effort that goes into like a long form YouTube video that I do, my style anyway, is like very thought provoking. It's a lot of numbers. It's a lot of data. That takes a long time to pull that together. As opposed to if I can just shoot a 1 minute thing and edit it down and make a reel out of it, something like that, it's so much easier.
What is your whole, like what is your workflow like in terms of the longer form that you do? Because you probably go around, correct me if I'm wrong, like 10 minutes?
Yep, 8 to 10 minutes.
8 to 10 minutes, you're in that, okay.
Yeah.
The growth has been insane that I've seen on your YouTube page, because I know when you started it. I actually know, I think I can probably pull up a Zoom recording the day that you told me you're going to do it. And I'm lying. It wasn't a Zoom recording. It was a nightcap with Jas during COVID.
That's right. Yeah, that's
okay?
right. Oh
You and
my
I,
gosh,
we had a drink. You had a glass of wine. I was having some scotch, and you were telling me you're going to get started with this.
Yeah.
So the growth's been insane. But what is your workflow like? So how do you come up with the ideas first, and then where do you sit and like how many takes does it maybe take? Because I've seen some bloopers of yours as well. I'm watching. I creep you, Darren. I'm not just like
vice versa.
Yeah, thank you. What's the workflow like?
Well, it's changed a little bit over time, but I think what I used to do is I used to be like, hey, what's going on in my world for the week? And I would create a video around that, right? Okay. Which was great. And that's why so much of my YouTube content is so well consumed, because it was like everything that I was experiencing as a business owner and as an entrepreneur and as a real estate investor. Then I started to understand the algorithm and the metrics, right? So it's like I reverse engineer my content now.
Okay.
So I will figure out what's going on in my life, and then I will search on YouTube and see what is a great searched topic, right? So if I'm going to do a video on land development, I might look at, okay, what specifically on land development does really well from a search perspective. I want to have that number north of 20 million searches, right? So that I can, that's a
And are you just Googling that literally?
No, it's a plugin that, Chrome or whatever else.
Like a TubeBuddy or something?
Yeah, something like that, right?
Okay.
So you plug that in there, and then it'll tell me like, this is a really well-searched topic. Then I will sit and I will actually create a script. So I don't write or type the script. I actually just come up with point form, and then I speak into my computer, which captures the voice and it types it out in a Google form, right? So it's my words.
Yes.
It's not, me typing something, because when we type something and when we speak it, we say and we 100%. We form our thoughts very differently.
Yes.
But if I'm speaking it, then it's actually my words. Now I've got my script, and now I take it and I put it on the prompter and I read it, because that saves me so much time. I used to have the point form content
and just go
and just like try to think, but I'm like, what did I say this? Did I say that? And then it would be like, I'd be an hour and 15 shooting.
Right.
And then my editor's like 4 hours trying to cut it all together.
Yeah.
Whereas I'd rather spend that energy on the front end.
Yes.
And spend an hour and a half scripting a video. And then once I get to the prompter, then I'm like 7 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes in and out. And my editor's like an hour cutting it down, because it's basically just me reading my own words of my own content, but at least it's in a much better format.
Just another example of ready, fire, aim. Because if you would never have come up with that workflow.
No.
Right? You wouldn't be sitting here and be a lot more comfortable than you probably were at the start, unless you actually did it. You did the point form stuff. You're like, okay,
tried it.
This is not working for the editor. But if you never just did anything, then you never again would be here. So to all the viewers and listeners, you take action first and then adjust along the way. Yeah. Why should real estate investors, in your opinion, do content?
I think that, the biggest thing is credibility.
Okay.
And people, I'm sure you hear this all the time too. I'm not an expert. I have imposter syndrome. I'm like, you don't have to be an expert. You're going to be on a journey that somebody wants to be on eventually, and you're going to be one step ahead of them. And so if you're not an expert, that's how you should lead. You should say, I'm not the expert, but here's what I do know. Here's what I can speak to. Here's an experience that I had. And someone watching that'll probably resonate with more people than where I am in my journey. Because a lot of people listen to me and they're like, what the hell did he just say? Like, I didn't understand most of that, right? Because I'm at a slightly different level now.
And you might use some jargon here and there once in a while, right?
But, I think when you can break it down for people in a simple form and you can just be like, here's where I am in my journey, and people love to see that. And so it provides credibility. It essentially, like I say, it provides notoriety in a way where people start to know you and understand who you are. And those two things, when it comes to being a real estate investor, are so important.
And that's why I think, even if, to your point, brother, if you're just starting out investing into real estate, the best type of content, in my opinion, would be to start a macro podcast. And I know that sounds like, what the fuck are you talking about, Jas? I'm not going to go and have all these no. Just do it on Zoom. And just call it. I'm going to give everyone the name of their show to make it very easy. It's Your Name Show.
100%.
Okay? And the reason I say doing a podcast, even when you're not an expert, is because you try to bring on the experts. Absolutely. And let people learn while you're learning, because you're kind of killing two birds with one stone. Not that I'm into killing birds, but you're hitting on two things, which is you're bringing a story to other people who are watching and listening, but then you're also learning at the same time, let alone all the content that you can actually rip out of there as well, right?
And if you don't know how to host, or if you don't know, ask the same 5 questions.
Oh my God.
Like, it's not difficult.
You know what
right?
I always say? Here's the 5 questions too. What, where, when, how, and why.
Exactly. And then just let people talk. They will, you'll have to probably cut most people off.
The truth is, one of the main reasons I started a podcast is because I know who did the heavy lifting today. Not me. It was you.
Exactly.
Like, all I have. And I just generally start, how you doing today, Darren? Like, go to the start. Go to the start of this podcast and all the others. He's like, if you ask somebody a question that starts with what, and your guest says yes or no to it, you probably like have the wrong guess, because it's just what it makes sense. Exactly.
Let's talk about the coaching. Yeah. Okay. How do people get involved? What is there, like, are you taking them on a journey and a path in terms of the coaching? Like, I want you to like talk all about it, and then and Jas and Nikki will make sure all the links are in the comments, in the description and in the video and stuff like that. Yeah.
So really, I have 2 sort of umbrellas that I fall under when it comes to coaching. I was doing for a long time, and this was what a lot of my YouTube content was around, just real estate investing in general, how to flip a property, how to use the BRRRR strategy, how to rent to own, how to do all that kind of stuff. All of that content's still available. For me, it's like I do a weekly coaching call with my students. I actually love it. I just show up and I'm like, what do you got? What have you got for me?
Q&A kind of thing.
Let's go. I don't teach anything during that time. They need to do self-study of all my content that's there, all the modules, they can go through them. But then it's like in real time, they get me once a week for an hour to be like, what are you dealing with? Hey, someone who was on last week, they're like, should I set up a corporation? When should I be doing this? All that kind of stuff. And they get an actual answer from me. They must find
so much value in this, bro.
And I love it. I love just coming on. Yeah. I don't have to prepare anything. I help people, right? Yeah. That was kind of like that one product, which is just around real estate investing in general.
Okay.
Now I've niched down into development specifically. And like I say, taking people from, the people that have a little bit of experience and now taking them to that next level. So it's like I have a development course, that you're coming to speak at next weekend. Can't wait for that.
So it's in person.
We do online modules.
Okay.
We do in-person learning. We do site visits. We go to site and visit projects that are in construction and also have been completed. So they get to see both sides.
Touch, see it, smell it, love it.
And then they also get coaching with me, so that after we're done the education part, now they get to go out and look at development projects. They get to bring them to me and say, is this one viable? Does it make sense? What's the next step? How do we do all this kind of stuff? I think you need all of that in development because it's a bit of a beast. And so you wouldn't want to just like teach people and say, have fun, good luck. You know, there's just so much money that can be made in development, but there's also so much money that can be lost.
100%.
And so you need somebody there to guide you along the way.
Well, I love the niche that you picked, and we spoke about it a lot in today's podcast, man. Like that, you're not doing the 200-300 units. That's not what you're talking about. You're not in the duplex and the triplex stuff. This middle, and the reason I say I love it is not only because I like you. It's because there's no one really else doing it.
No.
Like I can't really think of anybody who's really coaching on that as much as you are, and with the experience that you have. And I'm glad to hear that. So I like the online stuff because that's right across the world, obviously.
Yeah.
And so is that like you broke that up into module, like video modules or something?
So those are actually live still with me. So it's just online so that they can be anywhere in the country.
Okay.
And then they only have to come in person for that 3-day weekend, basically, right?
Okay.
And I'm doing an event in Victoria, BC in June. I've got my event here in May. I'll probably take the summer off, and then I'll start up launching again in the fall. But yeah, the nice thing about that is they can learn online from home, from wherever they are. They fly into Toronto for 3 days, or they fly into Victoria, or they fly in from wherever, or they drive in, whatever. And we've got 3 days, and then they've got the online coaching after that. They go back to wherever they're from, and they get to start looking at development projects, and I'm helping them along the way.
You used to obviously be on a lot of stages, and then there was a little bit of a break, and now you're kind of back on stages. Like, is that where you get a lot of juice from yourself personally?
I love it. I love the in-person stuff.
I thought so.
I mean, online is great for just giving everyone access to everything, but nothing replaces just this.
It's so true.
The interaction of being next to somebody in a room and talking to them and seeing how they react, seeing if they're actually getting it, 100%. Right? And then being able to apply that. And then it's also you get to network and meet people and all that kind of stuff, and we just have a lot of fun.
Well, I had a blast with you today, brother. I'm so glad we did this on like in person, because the last couple of things that we did do were through kind of like Instagram and Zoom and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to put you on the spot and say, like, not only do I want you to come back for part 3, 4, like I want you here another 10 times, because I know the next time I bring you on, like fucking, you're going to be up to another 10 different things. And so I just know who you are in that sense. I've watched the growth, and we have a lot of mutual friends and acquaintances. And like, I got to be honest, man, they all say the same thing about you. Like, he's like the most smiley guy in real estate. You know what I mean? And you're so positive, and you're bringing so much value into people's lives with helping them create wealth. My podcast has kind of gone through its own journey where I'm going to try to bring people onto this couch and educate them on all vehicles of creating wealth. Real estate, obviously, I'm a little bit more biased towards, because it's the only way that I kind of created wealth other than running businesses. And there's really no one better than you, not only in our city, in our country. And I just know you're going worldwide, and I love watching you, man. So thank you so much for doing this.
Hey, thanks for having me. I love
100%,
I love
buddy.
chatting with you,
Thank
and
you,
it's
brother.
always a good time.
100%.